digitize for 3D. I am using Chroma Inspire, so you can actually do any 3D puff digitizing with Inspire, and we can even convert some of our texts and fonts that we have in the software into a 3D font. So we can't just put foam under any type of file or any type of stitch. When we're making a 3D design, we are using a satin stitch. So with Chroma Inspire, we have our classic satin, and that's located just on the left near all of our 3 different stitch types. So we can, just as an example, I'm going to show you our classic satin, and this is the type of stitch that we'll put foam underneath to give it that 3D look. So this is the only stitch type that you can really put over 3D puff. So when we're creating our design, let's just do something easy to start out with, and then I'll show you guys some other options that we can do as far as shapes. So with our text tool, we can easily take any of our text pre-digitized fonts and make them into a 3D puff font. So what we are going to do is we're going to change a couple things. We're going to change the underlay. We will change the density. And then we will add in some end caps if necessary. And I'll show you guys what end caps mean and what those are in just a moment. So just to give you an idea of what we need, we have these 3 main things here, and this is what we're going to edit or change on the file. So the first thing, let's look at the density. Now, when we have some text written out, just like this, it's at a pretty high density. The density is referring to the distance in between each stitch. So we can see that there's a little bit of room in between each of these stitches. With 3D puff specifically, we really want those stitches to be very, very close together, and that way they will fully cover up that foam that you're placing underneath. So when we're changing the density, we have that option in the upper right-hand corner of our screen. We can select the fill, so it's the tab just next to the text, and we can lower the density. So a good density for 3D puff is going to be 0.2, and when I go to click apply, we'll see those stitches are really going to thicken up. So there's no space in between. They're very close together. I would not go much less than that, because that way, if you have even a lower density, those stitches are just going to pile on top of each other and cause a lot of bunching, and it won't look very good. So 0.2 is a good density. Now, the other thing we do want to change is the underlay. So we have the density set to 0.2. The underlay is going to be a center line underlay. So let's take a look at what the underlay is right now. If I have this text selected, I'm going to turn off my realistic view. And if we zoom in, we can see there's a zigzag line. That is the parallel underlay. So the underlay is what will stitch down first to sort of create the base for the letter, and it will also help to tack your material to your backing. So the underlay is definitely necessary when doing all regular embroidery. With 3D puff, what we don't want to happen is we don't want our underlay to flatten out our piece of foam or create more puncture holes in the foam. So if it creates a lot of puncture holes, it's going to just fall apart. So we want to change that underlay to be just a really thin line, and that way the underlay will just tack down the foam to the garment, and we can have those stitches stitch on top in a nice smooth satin pattern. So I'm going to click up to the top settings area, and about the 5th box over, we have the underlay. So right now we can see we have parallel. So we have the parallel underlay, and we're just going to uncheck that, and we're going to choose center line. And when I click apply, we'll see that it just eliminates those extra zigzag, and it just has a single center line running through the letter. Another thing that we might want to change on this underlay is the stitch length of the underlay. The less amount of needle pokes that we get with that underlay, the more puffy our foam will be. And again, we don't want the underlay to necessarily cut that foam. We don't want it to be all piecey. So we can change the stitch length to be higher. So that means the needle, instead of every 3 millimeters, every, say, 5 millimeters, it will jump and create a stitch. So you can see, if I look at my underlay now, we have less needle holes here in the underlay. So the stitch length I just changed here. Underneath, we have center line, we have stitch length, and then the run stitch length. Okay, so we changed our underlay, we changed our density, and now we want to do make some end caps. So what an end cap is it's a small area of stitch that will tuck in that foam and also cut the foam. So the P, the U, the F, these are good examples. Now, if we look at the P, for example, if I turn on the stitch ends option, which is at the top of my screen, we see all of these little dots, right? So I'm just toggling that on and off, on and off. All of these little dots is where the needle is going to puncture the fabric and the foam. So what happens at the end of this P when I don't have any needle punctures at the bottom? The foam will not get cut. So you're going to have a piece of foam sticking out from the bottom of that P. So we don't want that foam to stick out, and we want to make sure that it gets cut by the needle punctures. So what we do is we create our own little shape that will puncture needle holes right here in the foam. And it's not just to necessarily cut the foam, because maybe we put a little run stitch and that will just cut it. But what we want to do is tuck that foam in so that we don't see it sticking out from underneath that satin stitch. Okay, so does that make sense? So what I'm going to do here is I'm using my classic satin stitch, and what I'm going to do is create this shape that looks like this. So I just made this little shape, and what this is doing for me is, if you look at, if I place it under the letter, we now have needle holes at the bottom of this letter, bottom of the P. So this little shape here is called an end cap. So it's going to cap the end of a letter. And the way that I'm creating this is I'm going to put it underneath the P, and I can just bring the corner a little bit inset, bring it out to the edge of the letter. And it can be very small and short. We don't have to have it be super large. And if we look just at the letter sort of in 3D view, this is what the end cap is going to be, but we're putting this under the top stitches because we don't want to see that. That will stitch first, and then the red will go after. So we can just select it and we can order it to the back, and then it will hide it under the letter. So we want to put an end cap wherever the foam might end up sticking out. So let's take a look at the letter, and we can toggle that stitch ends view so that we can easily see where we need them. So on the number 3, I can put a really small one at the very top, and I can put a larger one at the bottom. So we can do something like this at the top. And so we want the stitches to run perpendicular to the top stitches. So they're running in the opposite direction. Okay, so the blue, the end cap, is going top down, left to right. And the number 3, those red stitches are going, vertically, and the blue stitches are going horizontally, right? So we just want to make sure that we have them going the opposite. And what you can do is you can actually just duplicate some of these. So I can grab this one and I can use this one over on another letter. So you can make one end cap and then just copy it. So here on the bottom of the 3, I'm going to make another one, and I'm just extending the shape to cover, and I'm only differentiating the color so that you guys can see better what this is looking like and how I'm placing it. So again, I'm going to order it to the back, and we continue this through the letters. Now the D, I have pretty much enough needle points on the edges of this letter. So on the D, I might just leave that as is. And we will always run a test design just to make sure. If you want to put a small one there, of course, why not? It's not going to hurt it, so you can easily add in a little small end cap. And I'm just copying these and placing them where I need them. I can always make it larger and sort of rotate this and place it on all of the areas that I might need that. So if we look at the P, you can see we have these needle points at the very top, right? Needle points at the bottom. So the foam will get fully cut and it will get all tucked into the end of that column. So we can just keep copying these shapes and just place them where we need. And that's really all that we have to do to make some text into 3D. We're just changing the density, the underlay, adding in those end caps where we need them. So let's take a look, and if you see something like this where those end caps are connected, looks like there's a jump stitch between them, you can add a trim. If you select one, or you can select all of those end caps, you can go into your Commands tab, which is at the top right of your screen, and you can add in an end command to be trim. And that will make sure that those get trimmed. So the way that we would stitch this out, since this is just one word or 2 words, I mean, and we are only doing this in puff, there's no flat embroidery element, we would just right away place our foam down onto the garment and those end caps would stitch out, and then the top red satin stitches would stitch out, and afterwards we simply tear away that foam and use a heat gun to really make sure that all the foam is shrunken in underneath those stitches. There are some fonts that might not need an end cap. One of them being Cooper. This is a very rounded text, and you can see that around the entire letter there are small needle points. So we wouldn't need to create end caps on this font style. So on this one, I would just simply change the density, 0.2, change the underlay to that center line, and increase the stitch length to 4 or 5. And then I'm finished with this 3D. I can just simply put it over some foam and I will be good to go. Let's say we wanted to create a shape, so something that is not going to be letters. Then we could create some shapes, and as long as they are satin stitches, we can make these into 3D very easily just by doing the same things. So this triangle shape here, I would change the density again, and the underlay, I can definitely change that to just a simple centerline underlay, and this one is ready to go. So again, we have those needle points around the entire shape, and we don't really need to add an end cap. Now, what I just changed on this shape is I actually changed the stitch direction. So with the triangle looking like this, you can see at the bottom there are needle points. If you were to adjust that stitch direction, you see that now I actually don't have any at the bottom, so I would need to add an end cap. So just small differences like that. What I recommend is keep that stitch end option turned on, and that way you can see right off the bat where those needle points are, and you're able to add an end cap where you might need it. So any questions? So the thread will be trimmed always unless you see a line like we have the R in between the R and the I. Right here that's a jump stitch. So that's showing us that the thread is actually going to jump to the other letter. The I, the top of the I, there's a jump stitch there. Between the I and the C, there aren't any threads looking like there, so that's going to trim. Whenever we see this line connecting, that's showing us that it's a jump stitch. If you see a very thin dotted line, if we look at this slanted, dotted, very faint line, the only thing that is showing me is the machine is going to move from the bottom of the D and move up to the top of the P, but this is a dashed line. This is not going to be a stitch or a piece of thread. That's just showing you the path. So we can see the path from these shapes where they're going. So bottom of the P, then it will go to the top of the U. Your trims are always going to be trimmed automatically. What you can do with some text is you can go into your commands tab and you can make sure that you have the text command to trim in between characters, and now I have eliminated those short jump stitches between those letters. So if I have none, it does have some jump stitches. If I have trim between characters, then it will trim between the characters. The I is considered a branch, so the top of the I, it will have that little jump there, and we cannot remove that with Chroma Inspire. So another question is, how do we change the stitch length? That will be found in the Fill tab, and here we have the stitch length as 3.5 millimeters. If you change the stitch length to be a lot lower, then you have more needle holes, and you don't quite want to have it be too low. Usually the default is a good stitch length. The time where we're changing the stitch length is the underlay, and so here on the underlay, that's where we're changing the underlay stitch length, so we have way less needle punctures. So let's take a look at some more shapes, and we're going to take a peek at the artwork tool and just use some of our pre-created shapes. Like I used the triangle. We can make some 3D stars. We can make, let's say, a heart. So if we wanted to make some like a nice patch design, and we want to make this 3D heart in the middle. So I just want to give you guys like a little example of how we can create some flat and puff designs together. So using our artwork tool, with the artwork tool, after we say like fill in those shapes, and I'm looking at the upper right hand corner, we have this large red circle, and with the artwork tool, we're using the auto digitizer in combination. So then it auto digitizes this red circle. Now I have, that in a complex fill. So we can incorporate 3D with designs that have just some flat areas as well. So let's say we have this circle design, and then maybe I want to say, Valentine's, and have a little bit of a flat sort of aspect to the design. And on the machine, really what we're doing here is we're just setting the mode to be automatic manual. And that way we can make sure that we add the foam at the proper time. So let's just make this a little random design. I'm just doing something quickly here. And we want to add in a 3D component. So maybe some 3D hearts on top of the patch. So we can really easily make any 3D shape. Again, what we're doing here is we need to make sure it's a satin stitch. So if I use this artwork tool and I have these 2 hearts, they're not filled in right now, so I do need to fill these in. So I'm going to select both of them and I will go to the type up here and I will choose fill and we'll apply it. So now I have these red hearts. If I go to the auto digitizer, it's going to choose the stitch type that it sees fit for that shape or that size. So it initially chose a complex fill stitch type. We can't put that stitch over foam because it will just flatten it out completely and it will be really pointless to put foam. So what we need to do is we're going to sort of trick the program into making these hearts into a satin. Now if we make them very small and then auto digitize, it will actually choose a different stitch type, which we can see now is a satin stitch type. And I can enlarge them from there. What these are looking like now though is they are segmented. They have stitches running, you know, half and half. And so we can edit that just using the shape tool. You can see you have this blue line down the center. And so I could delete that split line. And now I have a heart that looks a little bit more like full. And just by changing the angle line, we get a whole different feel, right? So now this heart, just adjusting that angle line to be like a nice slant, because essentially we want those stitches to fill in the top curves. And we're doing the same things. I changed the density. I'm going to go change the underlay. I could even turn off the underlay, and that way we just have like a quick line that kind of starts up the shape. So now I have this heart and I can just duplicate this one. And we can put some foam underneath these hearts so we can have a design that is 3D and flat. And that will give us a little bit more variety in our designs. So any questions on 3D? It's really very easy to do. And as long as you can get a nice satin stitch, then you can make any shape into a 3D shape by incorporating your foam and just making making the changes that we discussed. The density, 0.2, underlay, center line, or maybe none. And then we have a quick 3D shape. Super, super easy to do. Any of the text that you use in the text tool can be made into 3D as well. So our rounded text is very easy. We don't need those end caps. The text that is more boxy, we have our end caps that are necessary. Okay. So we had a question about the foam. So the foam, you want to make sure that it is embroidery foam, because embroidery foam will be dense and the proper like thickness and density for actual embroidery. So there is a difference between like a craft piece of foam and embroidery foam. So if you use a craft foam, then it might be more crumbly and it won't give you the same high quality results. So it does matter the type of foam you use. If you've seen our embroidery hub video, we have done foam in thickness of, we used about 4 sheets to create a really thick design. So you can double up the foam to make it a lot thicker. And usually the foam is about like 1 to 2 millimeters in thickness, but be sure to use embroidery foam. And yes, the text can be a 0.2 density only because we're doing foam. I wouldn't have your text be that density if you're just stitching out flat. It's just going to be a little too thick. With the foam underneath, you really want those stitches to almost overlap, and that way it covers that foam completely.